Garrettsburg has always been a place where news travels faster than the internet. In a town with a population of just over 8,000, the arrival of a stranger was always an event. And when that stranger turned out to be an attractive young woman, the gossip didn't stop for weeks. Ashley King first appeared at the Main Street Cafe on a cold February morning in 2024. 29 years old, with chestnut hair and a smile that seemed genuine, she immediately caught the attention of the cafe's regulars. The cafe's owner, Betty Wilson, hired her on the spot. Good waitresses were hard to find in Garrettsburg. She said she wanted to start a new life, Betty later told Detective Stevens. She said she was tired of big cities and the hustle and bustle. She wanted a quiet place to settle down. Robert Henderson learned about the new waitress from his neighbor Dorothy Pierce, who stopped by the cafe every morning for her usual coffee with milk. Dorothy, 72 years old, and a former teacher at the local school for 45 years, had a keen sense of people, and something about the new girl made her uneasy. "She's too nice," Dorothy said to her cat Chester, the only constant listener to her musings. "No one smiles that much for no reason." But Bob Henderson saw something completely different in Ashley. When he first walked into the cafe that March day, still reeling from the first anniversary of his wife Margaret's death, Ashley greeted him with such warmth that it was as if they were old friends. "You look tired," she said, pouring him a cup of coffee. "Bad day?" Bob wasn't used to anyone asking how he was feeling. After Margaret died, people offered their condolences and brought casseroles, but gradually life returned to normal, and his grief became a private matter. Ashley, however, seemed to see right through him. "They're always tough," he replied with a sad smile, "especially when you come home to an empty house." Robert Henderson had owned the Henderson & Sons hardware store on Main Street for 35 years. He had inherited it from his father and hoped to pass it on to his son, but he and Margaret never had any children. At 67, he still worked 6 days a week, not so much for the money as to keep himself from being alone with his memories. The store was his pride and joy, neat rows of tools, paints, nails, and everything else you might need to repair a house. The locals knew that if Bob didn't have something, it would be hard to find in Garrettsburg. He remembered every customer, their preferences, their family circumstances. "Bob is a good man," people in town said about him. "Honest, reliable. It's a shame he's all alone." Ashley quickly realized this. She noticed how he lingered in the cafe after breakfast, in no hurry to return to work. How he ordered another cup of coffee even though he had already had 2. How his face lit up when she asked him about his life or the store. "Tell me about your store," she asked one day, sitting down at his table on a quiet afternoon. "I haven't had a chance to visit yet, but I hear it's a special place." Bob talked about the store as if it were his child. He told her how his father had opened it in 1952, how he and Margaret had worked side by side, with her doing the books and him talking to the customers. He told her about the regular customers who came in not just for the merchandise but for advice. He told her how hard it had become to run the business on his own. "Sounds like a place where people feel at home," Ashley said. "There are fewer and fewer places like that." Dorothy Pierce watched the relationship develop with growing concern. She saw how Bob was transformed in Ashley's presence, how he seemed to grow younger before her eyes, but she also noticed things that escaped the attention of a man in love. For example, how Ashley studied the other patrons of the cafe, memorizing who ordered what, who talked to whom. How she discreetly found out details about people's lives, their jobs, their families. How her smile became less genuine when she thought no one was looking. "Where are you from, dear?" Dorothy asked one day when Ashley brought her her usual coffee. "Louisville," Ashley replied quickly, tired of the city. "Family? Friends? Don't you miss them?" "I didn't have much of a family, and real friends understand." Dorothy noticed how Ashley avoided details, how she skillfully changed the subject. It wasn't like the usual reluctance to open up. It was more like she was hiding something. Jason Miller, Bob's nephew, came to Garrettsburg once a month. The 35-year-old auto mechanic lived in Lexington, an hour and a half away, and visited his uncle more out of a sense of duty than affection. Their relationship was polite but cool. Jason thought his uncle was old-fashioned, and Bob didn't approve of his nephew's lifestyle. When Jason arrived in April, he immediately noticed a change in his uncle. Bob looked more alert. had even gotten a haircut and bought a new shirt. "You look good, Uncle Bob," Jason said, settling into his usual chair in the living room. "Something different?" "Yeah, you could say that," Bob replied with a smile. "I met a girl, Ashley. She works at a cafe." Jason was taken aback. He knew his uncle had been lonely since Aunt Margaret's death, but he hadn't expected him to start dating. "A girl? Uncle Bob, are you sure that's a good idea?" "Why not? I'm not dead yet, Jason, and Ashley is wonderful. She takes good care of me." Jason wanted to say that a 29-year-old girl was unlikely to be interested in a 67-year-old man out of pure sympathy, but he held back. His uncle seemed happy for the first time in many months. The relationship between Bob and Ashley developed slowly but steadily. She would come to his shop during her lunch break, help him with odd jobs, and listen to him talk about his past. Bob felt needed and important. Ashley admired his knowledge, his experience, his kindness. "You're so wise," she would say. "I can learn so much from you." Bob blossomed from such words. He began to cook breakfast for her, buy her favorite flowers, and plan little surprises. Ashley accepted it all with gratitude, but Dorothy noticed that her gratitude was more practical than emotional. By May, their relationship was the talk of the town. Some thought Bob deserved happiness after all he had lost. Others questioned the young woman's motives. "It's none of my business," Sheriff Tom Riley told his wife, "but something's not right. It's all happening too fast." Detective Mark Stevens, a 45-year-old veteran of the local police force, had known Bob for many years. They weren't close friends, but Mark respected the old man for his honesty and integrity. When rumors of Bob's new relationship reached him, he took it philosophically. "People have a right to be happy," he told his wife. "If Bob's happy, that's his business." But when Ashley began showing up at Bob's house more often, staying overnight, things changed. Dorothy Pierce, whose house was across the street from the Hendersons, couldn't help but notice what was going on. She saw Ashley arrive late at night and leave early in the morning. She saw Bob start buying more groceries, women's cosmetics, new clothes. She saw how his life changed. He started opening the store later and closing earlier. "Bob," she said to him one day when she ran into him at the mailbox, "I'm worried about you." "Don't worry, Dorothy, I'm fine. Better than I've been in a long time." "This girl, do you know her well?" Bob frowned. "I know her well enough. She's kind and caring. Margaret would approve of her." Dorothy doubted that, but she didn't argue. She understood that Bob was in love, and people in love rarely listen to reason. At the end of May, something happened that changed everything. Ashley confessed to Bob that she was having trouble with her apartment. Her landlord was selling the place she was renting, and she needed to find a new place. "I don't know what to do," she said, sitting in Bob's kitchen and staring out the window. "Housing is expensive here, and I just started working. I may have to leave town." Bob felt a tightness in his chest at the thought of Ashley leaving. Over the past few months, she had become the center of his life, the reason he woke up in the morning with a smile on his face. "Don't leave," he said quietly. "Move in with me." Ashley turned to him in surprise. "With you? Bob, I can't. What will people say?" "I don't care what people say. The house is big. There are plenty of rooms. You can live here until you find something suitable." Ashley was silent, considering the offer. Finally, she touched his hand gently. "Are you sure? I don't want to cause you any trouble or inconvenience. No trouble at all. On the contrary, I'd be happy to have some life in the house again." Dorothy Pierce watched from her window as Ashley moved her belongings into Bob's house in early June. There weren't many boxes. The girl's entire life fit into the trunk of an old sedan. Dorothy found that strange, too. People who are really starting a new life usually bring more things with them, more memories. But Bob was happy. He helped Ashley settle into the guest room, showed her around the house, and told her stories about each room and each item. Ashley listened attentively, asked questions, and expressed her admiration. "What a cozy house," she said. "You can feel that happy people lived here." "Yes," Bob replied. "Margaret loved this house. We lived here for 30 years. Ashley gently touched a photograph on the mantelpiece. Bob and Margaret on their wedding day. "She was beautiful." You must have loved her very much. I did, and I always will. I understand, and I don't want to replace her or change anything. I just want to help you feel less lonely. Bob felt his heart overflow with gratitude. Ashley understood him, accepted his past, didn't demand the impossible. That evening, after Ashley had finally moved in with Bob, Dorothy called Jason. "I'm worried about your uncle," she said without preamble. "What's wrong, Mrs. Pierce?" "That woman moved in with him, Ashley King. I don't trust her." Jason sighed. He had expected something like this. Uncle Bob is a grown man. He can make his own decisions. "Maybe you're right, but keep an eye on him, please. Something's not right." After talking to Dorothy, Jason sat in his workshop for a long time, thinking. He knew he should pay more attention to his uncle, but his work and his own life always came first. Now he felt guilty. If something happened to his uncle, he would never forgive himself. Meanwhile, at the house on Main Street, Bob and Ashley were sitting in the kitchen having tea. Bob was talking about his plans for the store and possibly expanding the product line. Ashley listened, nodded, and asked intelligent questions. "You know, Bob," she said finally, "you give me so much. A roof over my head, care, kindness. I want to repay you." "You already do. Your presence here is more than I could have hoped for." "No, it's not. I want to take care of you properly. Cook, clean, help with the store. I want to be useful." Bob looked at her tenderly. "You don't have to. I do, because you're important to me. Because I think I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air. Bob felt his heartbeat quicken. He hadn't expected such a confession, wasn't ready for it. "Ashley, I know what you're thinking. I'm young, you're older, but age is just a number. What matters is how we feel about each other." Bob was silent, trying to understand his own feelings. He cared about Ashley and was grateful to her for bringing meaning back into his life. "But love, I need some time," he finally said. "Of course, I'm in no rush. We have time to figure out our feelings." That night, Bob couldn't sleep for a long time. He thought about Margaret, about their life together, about what it meant to start over at his age. He thought about Ashley, her smile, how she made him feel young. Across the street, Dorothy Pierce was also awake, staring out her window at the Henderson house, where now 2 rooms were lit instead of 1. Ashley King moved in with Bob Henderson under the pretext of temporary housing problems. A romantic relationship develops between them, arousing the suspicions of their neighbor Dorothy Pierce and Bob's nephew Jason. Ashley confessed her feelings for Bob, and now they live under the same roof on Main Street. The story. The first weeks of living together seemed idyllic to Bob. Ashley got up early, made breakfast, and saw him off to work with a warm smile. The house was filled with the sounds of life again. The clatter of dishes in the kitchen, the noise of the vacuum cleaner, and the quiet humming of melodies while cleaning. "You're transforming this house," Bob would say when he came home in the evening and found dinner on the table, fresh flowers in a vase, and the mail neatly sorted. "The house needed a woman's touch," Ashley would reply, straightening his tie. "And you needed someone to take care of you." Detective Mark Stevens noticed the changes in Bob during their chance meeting at the post office. The old man looked younger, more energetic. Even his gait was more confident. "How are you, Bob?" Mark asked. "Wonderful, just wonderful. You know, Mark, I used to think that happiness was something that only happened when you were young. It turns out that life can surprise you at any age." Mark nodded, but something in Bob's tone alarmed him. It was too enthusiastic, too artificial. It was as if Bob was trying to convince not only his conversation partner, but also himself. Dorothy Pierce watched the house across the street with growing concern. She noticed details that escaped the love-struck Bob. For example, how Ashley studied the mail before handing it to Bob, how she answered phone calls even when Bob was home, how she gradually removed Margaret's photos from the living room, explaining that it was necessary to create new memories. "Bob," Dorothy decided to speak up when she met him in the garden. "How's your roommate?" "Ashley's wonderful," Bob replied, but there was a defensive note in his voice. "She takes such good care of me. She cooks, cleans, makes sure I take my medicine on time." "Medicine?" Dorothy asked, surprised. "You're healthy." Vitamins. Bob quickly corrected himself. Ashley thinks it's important to stay healthy at my age. Dorothy frowned. As far as she could remember, Bob had never complained about his health and had regular checkups with Dr. Wilkins. Ashley, meanwhile, was methodically strengthening her position. She took over the housekeeping, insisted on doing the shopping, and gradually isolated Bob from his old habits and contacts. "Why do you need to go to a cafe for breakfast?" she would say. "I'll make it at home. It's healthier and cheaper." "But I like to socialize with people. And in the evening, you get tired of people in the store. It should be quiet at home, just the two of us." Gradually, Bob began to appear less and less in his usual places. Betty Wilson from the cafe was surprised by his absence. "Strange," she said to Dorothy. "Bob has been coming here every morning for 10 years, and now he hasn't been seen for weeks." "Ashley's cooking for him at home," Dorothy explained with ill-concealed irritation. "She's a nice girl," Betty remarked, "but there's something about her." "Do you feel that too?" "Yes, she asks too many questions. About people, their business, their money. Curiosity isn't always innocent." Jason arrived in Garrettsburg in early July and immediately noticed the changes. The house looked different. New curtains, rearranged furniture, family photos gone. "Uncle Bob, where's Aunt Margaret's photo from the mantelpiece?" "Oh, Ashley took it to her bedroom. She thinks having pictures of dead people in the living room makes it look sad." Jason felt a twinge of irritation. This was Aunt Margaret's house too. Her memory. "No one forgets Margaret," Bob interrupted with unexpected harshness. "But life goes on. Ashley helps me move forward." At that moment, Ashley entered the room with a tray of tea. She smiled at Jason, but he noticed that the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Jason, it's so good to see you. Bob has told me so much about you." "The feeling is mutual," Jason replied dryly. "I hope you're taking good care of your uncle." "Oh, of course. Bob means a lot to me. I'm doing everything I can to make him happy." Jason studied her face, trying to figure out what was behind those words. Ashley seemed confident, but he noticed small details. How she controlled the conversation, steering it in the right direction. How she touched Bob unobtrusively, showing closeness. "Uncle, can we take a walk? Talk alone?" Bob glanced at Ashley as if asking for permission. This did not escape Jason's attention. "Of course," Ashley said. "I'll fix lunch." On the porch, Jason decided to be direct. "Uncle Bob, what's going on? You've changed. For the better, I hope." "I don't know. You look dependent. On her." Bob frowned. "Jason, I appreciate your concern, but I'm a grown man. Ashley makes my life better. Is that so wrong? What do you know about her? Where is she from? Where did she work? Why did she move to Garrettsburg?" "I know enough. She's kind and caring." "That's not answering my question." Bob paused, looking out at the garden. "She's from Louisville. She worked in a restaurant. She was tired of the big city." "That's all?" "The past isn't always important, Jason. It's the present that matters." Jason realized that his uncle wasn't ready to listen to criticism, but he couldn't shake his uneasiness. After dinner, when Ashley went to the store for groceries, Jason tried again. "Uncle, I just want you to be careful. Sometimes people—" "Jason," Bob interrupted him. "I know what you're thinking. A rich old man and a young woman, but you're wrong. Ashley isn't interested in my money." "How do you know?" "She never asks for money. On the contrary, she wants to get a second job to help with the expenses. She's independent." Jason wanted to argue, but realized it was useless. His uncle was in love, and people in love don't listen to reason. That evening, Ashley and Bob sat on the porch watching the sunset. Ashley cautiously brought up the subject of the future. "Bob, what will happen to me if something happens to you?" "What do you mean?" "Well, you're older than me, that's a fact. And if you get sick or I'm left alone, without a home, without support..." Bob felt a pang of guilt. He really hadn't thought about that. "You're right. That's not fair to you." "I'm not asking for anything for myself," Ashley quickly added. "I just want to know what I can count on. Maybe we should make something official. For my peace of mind?" "What do you suggest?" "I don't know. Maybe a will? Or could you sign the house over to me, so I know I won't end up on the street?" Bob thought about it. The suggestion seemed reasonable. Ashley cared about him and made his life better. Wouldn't it be fair to secure her future? The house is big, he said slowly. Too big for one person. But together we could… What? Maybe we should get married? Ashley turned to him in surprise. Bob, are you serious? Absolutely. We care about each other. I'm happy with you. Isn't that enough for marriage? Ashley paused, considering the proposal. Marriage would simplify many things and give her legal rights to his property. But people will say I'm a gold digger. I don't care what people say. I do. I don't want you to be judged because of me. Bob took her hand. Then what do you suggest? Maybe we should start small. Put the house in my name. If our relationship stands the test of time, we can get married later. Okay, Bob agreed. I'll talk to my lawyer. Across the street, Dorothy Pierce watched the scene from her window. She couldn't hear the words, but she could see the gestures and expressions on their faces, and she didn't like what she saw. The next day, Dorothy called Jason. Something's going on, she said without preamble. They were talking on the porch for a long time yesterday. Bob looked upset. I tried to talk to him, Jason replied. He won't listen. He says he's happy. Do you believe him? Jason paused. I don't know. Maybe he really is happy, but that doesn't mean he's making the right decisions. We have to do something. What? He's a grown man. I can't make him break up with her. You could check out her background. Do you have any connections in the police? Jason thought about it. It was a reasonable idea, though not entirely ethical. I'll try to find out something. Meanwhile, Bob met with his lawyer, Henry Coleman, who had been handling his affairs for 20 years. Henry was surprised by the request to transfer the house to Ashley's name. Bob, are you sure? This is a big decision. I'm sure. Ashley cares about me. She deserves stability. What will Jason say? He's your only heir. Jason has his own life. He doesn't even visit me regularly. Henry tried to dissuade his client, explaining the risks and suggesting alternatives. But Bob was adamant. Get the paperwork ready, Henry. I've made my decision. When Bob told Ashley about his visit to the lawyer, she hugged him with such gratitude that he felt like the most generous person on earth. You're so kind, she whispered. I'll do everything I can to earn your trust. But Dorothy Pierce didn't give up. She started her own investigation, carefully asking people about Ashley. What she learned only reinforced her suspicions. No one in town knew Ashley before she showed up at the cafe. She had no references, no letters of recommendation, and no contact with her previous place of employment. This was strange for someone who had supposedly just moved to town. I checked the Louisville phone book, Dorothy told her cat, Chester. No kings with the name Ashley. Of course, that could mean nothing, but it could mean everything. That evening, when the paperwork for the house transfer was supposed to be ready, Ashley was preparing a special dinner. Candles, the best wine from Bob's cellar, his favorite dish. What are we celebrating? Bob asked. The beginning of a new life, Ashley replied, raising her glass. To us. To us, Bob repeated, unaware that this toast could be one of the last in his life. On the morning of July 15th, Bob woke up with a sense of the importance of the day ahead. Today, he and Ashley were supposed to sign the papers at Henry Coleman's office. Ashley got up early and prepared a special breakfast: blueberry pancakes, freshly squeezed orange juice, and coffee with cinnamon. Are you nervous? She asked, watching Bob stir his coffee absent-mindedly. A little. It's a big step. For both of us, Ashley replied softly, but I believe we're making the right decision. On their way to the lawyer's office, they ran into Dorothy Pierce at the pharmacy. The elderly woman gave them a searching look. Good morning, Bob. Where are you all dressed up for? To the lawyer, Bob replied without going into details. On important business? Ashley took Bob's arm a little tighter. Family matters, Mrs. Pierce, nothing serious. Dorothy watched them go, feeling a growing sense of unease. Something was happening, and she was sure it wasn't good. At the lawyer's office, Henry Coleman greeted them with professional courtesy, but Bob noticed the concern in his old friend's eyes. Bob, I want to make sure you understand the consequences of this decision. The house is worth about $300,000. It's your main asset. I understand, Henry. Ashley deserves security. Henry glanced at Ashley, who sat quietly with her hands folded in her lap. "Miss King, do you realize the responsibility you are taking on? This house is Mr. Henderson's life's work." "Of course," Ashley replied with sincerity in her voice. "I will take care of it as if it were my own, because now it's our home." Henry laid out the documents on the table, explaining each point. Bob listened distractedly, his mind elsewhere. He was imagining their future life, peaceful and happy. "You need to sign here, Bob," Henry said, pointing to a line in the contract. Bob picked up the pen, but suddenly stopped. "What if I want to sell the house?" "That decision will now be up to Miss King. You retain the right to live there for the rest of your life, but she becomes the owner." Ashley gently touched Bob's hand. "We'll decide everything together. I would never do anything against your interests." Bob nodded and signed the documents. Half an hour later, the house officially belonged to Ashley King. "Congratulations," Henry said without enthusiasm. "The documents will take effect after registration with the land registry." As she left the office, Ashley was beaming with happiness. "Thank you, Bob. You have no idea how much this means to me." "I'm glad you're happy," Bob replied. But inside he felt a twinge of regret. Maybe it had been too hasty a decision. Meanwhile, Jason received the results of his informal investigation. His friend from the Lexington police, Detective Rick Harris, had contacted his colleagues in Louisville. "Your Ashley King is an interesting character," Rick reported over the phone. "She's known in Louisville. Her real name is Ashley King Thompson. She's divorced, with 2 children who live with her ex-husband. She's worked in several restaurants but was fired under suspicious circumstances." "What kind of circumstances?" "Once she was caught stealing from the cash register. Another time she was accused of credit card fraud. Nothing was proven, but her reputation is ruined." Jason felt the blood drain from his face. "That's not all?" "Unfortunately, no. 6 months ago, she was dating an older man who owned a small business, Robert Shelton, 71 years old. He died of a heart attack a month after he signed over his car and savings account to her." "My God." "There was no investigation. The doctor confirmed natural causes. But the Shelton family suspected foul play. Ashley disappeared from town right after the funeral." Jason realized he had to go to Garrettsburg immediately. He tried to call his uncle, but no one answered. Dorothy Pierce wasn't sitting idly by either. She asked Detective Mark Stevens to informally check on Ashley. "Mrs. Pierce, I understand your concern, but I have no grounds for an official investigation. No one has filed a report, and no crime has been committed. But something's wrong with that woman. Bob is changing, becoming dependent and isolated." Mark sighed. "All right. I'll try to find out something informally, but I can't promise anything." That evening, Ashley celebrated her success with champagne she found in Bob's wine cellar. She was excited and more talkative than usual. "You know, Bob, I think it's time to make some changes to the house. Redecorate, maybe repaint the walls." "Sure, honey, it's your house now." "Our house," she corrected, but there was something in her eyes that Bob couldn't quite place. "And I want to make it perfect for us." That night, Bob couldn't sleep. Something about Ashley's behavior bothered him. She was too happy, too excited, and several times he caught her looking through the drawers in his desk. "What are you looking for?" he asked once. "Nothing in particular. Just want to know where everything is. I'm the lady of the house now." The next day, Jason arrived in town. He was agitated and angry. Bob wasn't home. He was working at the store. Ashley greeted Jason with cold politeness. "Jason, what a surprise. Bob didn't say you were coming." "I need to talk to Uncle Bob. It's urgent." "He's at the store, but maybe I can help you with something?" Jason looked at her intently. "You can. Tell me about Robert Shelton." Ashley's face instantly turned pale, but she quickly regained her composure. "I don't know who you're talking about." 71 years old, owner of a company in Louisville. He died of a heart attack 6 months ago after signing over his property to you. Ashley was silent for a few seconds, considering her response. "Bob was an elderly man with a heart condition. I took care of him for a while. His death was natural." "Bob? His name was Robert, like my uncle. That's an interesting coincidence." "People die, Jason. It's a sad fact of life." especially elderly men who sign their property over to you. Ashley stood up. I don't like the direction this conversation is going. I think you should leave. I'm not going anywhere until I talk to my uncle. At that moment, Bob appeared. He looked tired and agitated. Jason? What's going on? Uncle Bob, we need to talk. Alone. Bob glanced at Ashley, who nodded with an understanding smile. Of course. I'll make some coffee. When they were alone, Jason told him everything he knew. About Ashley's past, about Robert Shelton, about the police's suspicions. Bob listened silently, his face gradually becoming darker. Is this true? He finally asked. Every word. Uncle, you're in danger. Bob was silent for a long time, staring out the window. Maybe there's an explanation. What explanation could there be for someone dying right after transferring property? She cared about him, just like she cares about me. Uncle, did you sign the house over to her today? Bob nodded without looking up. My God, we have to cancel the deal. Immediately. It's too late. The documents are already at the land registry. Jason felt panic rising. Then you have to leave, right now. Where? This is my home, my life, which now belongs to a woman who may have murdered her previous lover. Ashley entered the room with a tray of coffee. She immediately sensed the tension. Is everything okay? Bob looked at her intently. Ashley, tell me about Robert Shelton. Ashley set the tray down and sat across from them. What exactly do you want to know? The truth. The truth is that I cared for a sick old man. He was lonely, just as you are lonely. I gave him care and attention during the last months of his life. And he signed his property over to you. He was grateful, just as you are grateful. Jason couldn't take it anymore. What about the others? How many were there? Ashley looked at him with cold hatred. You don't understand. I give these people what they need most. Love and care at the end of their lives. In return, they secure my future. It's a fair deal. Fair deal? Jason exclaimed. You're killing people. I haven't killed anyone, Ashley replied calmly. People die on their own, from old age, disease, broken hearts. Bob stood up, swaying. I need to think. Bob, Ashley said softly. Don't listen to him. He's just upset about the inheritance. He wanted your house. That's not true, Jason shouted. Then why did he show up now? Where was he when you were suffering from loneliness? Bob stopped in the doorway. Ashley's words hit home. Jason had rarely visited him and could indeed count on his inheritance. Uncle, Jason tried to explain. I'm not the perfect nephew, that's true. But I don't want you to die. She does. Ashley stood up and walked over to Bob. You know me. You know how I feel about you. Have I ever hurt you? Bob looked at her, then at Jason. I need time to think. Jason, go home. We'll talk later. Uncle, go, please. Jason realized he had lost. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. Uncle Bob, he said at the door, if anything happens, remember, I warned you. After Jason left, Ashley was unusually affectionate toward Bob. She cooked his favorite meals, massaged his shoulders, and told funny stories. But Bob sensed a change in her behavior. Too much attention, too much insistent care. He lay awake late into the night, analyzing the last few months. Ashley's sudden appearance in his life, her quick agreement to move in with him, her insistence on re-registering the house, it all added up to a disturbing picture. In the next room, Ashley was also awake. She knew the game had changed. Jason knew too much, and sooner or later he would convince his uncle or the police. He had to act quickly. She took out her phone and dialed a familiar number. It's me, she said quietly. Yes, everything is going according to plan. The house is mine. What, problems? Nothing major. Nothing I can't handle. Tomorrow? Okay, tomorrow it'll all be over. In the morning, Bob woke up with a heavy head and a strange taste in his mouth. Ashley was already in the kitchen, making breakfast. Good morning, honey. How did you sleep? Bad. Strange dreams. It's stress, after yesterday's conversation with Jason. Bob tried to remember the details of the conversation, but his thoughts were jumbled. Ashley, did we really talk about some Robert? Yes, dear. Jason made up some ridiculous story to break us up. Did we sign the documents? Ashley came over and gently stroked his head. Don't think about it now. Eat your breakfast. But Bob couldn't stop himself. His memory was starting to come back, and what he remembered terrified him. Bob woke up on July 16th with the feeling that something had changed. His head felt heavy, his mouth tasted like metal, and his memories of yesterday seemed blurred, as if seen through a fog. Ashley was already bustling about in the kitchen. The smell of bacon and coffee should have felt familiar and comforting, but instead it made him feel nauseous. "Good morning, dear," she said without turning around. "How are you feeling?" "Strange. My head hurts." "Yesterday was a tough day. Jason upset you with his ridiculous accusations." Bob tried to remember the details of his conversation with his nephew, but only fragments came to mind. Some Robert Shelton, suspicion of murder, demands to leave. "Ashley, what exactly did Jason say?" She turned to him with a caring smile. "Nonsense, dear. He's jealous of our happiness. He's afraid he'll be left without an inheritance. But he mentioned someone from your past." "Yes, Robert. I took care of him for a while. He was sick and lonely. He died of a heart attack." She moved closer and stroked his shoulder. "Jason wants to make it sound sinister." Bob studied her face, trying to find signs of deception. But Ashley looked him straight in the eye, her voice sounding sincere. "I don't understand why he would do that. Money, Bob. Your house, your shop. That's a considerable fortune. He was counting on his inheritance." The logic was convincing, but something inside Bob resisted that explanation. Jason wasn't a greedy man, and his concern seemed genuine. Breakfast was spent in uncomfortable silence. Bob barely touched his food. His stomach was churning with nausea. Ashley noticed. "You haven't been eating well lately. Maybe you should see a doctor?" "No, I'm fine. Just nerves." "Then stay home today. Get some rest. I'll go to the store for groceries." Bob nodded. After yesterday's events, the thought of spending the whole day interacting with customers seemed unbearable. Ashley left around 10 in the morning. Bob was left alone in the house that now officially belonged to her. The thought made him feel strange, a mixture of regret and anxiety. He tried to go about his usual business, checking the mail, reading the newspaper, but he couldn't concentrate. His thoughts kept returning to his conversation with Jason. Around noon, the phone rang. It was Jason. "Uncle Bob, how are you? I'm worried about you." "I'm fine, Jason, just tired." "Have you thought about what I told you?" Bob paused. "I have, but it's all so unbelievable." "Uncle, promise me. If you feel the slightest danger, call me immediately, or call the neighbors, Dorothy Pierce." "Okay. And another thing, I contacted Detective Stevens. I told him everything. He promised to come by today." Bob felt a pang of irritation. "Why did you do that?" "Because I'm afraid for your life." After the conversation, Bob sat in his chair for a long time, thinking. Detective Stevens was serious. If he came with questions, Ashley would realize that the suspicions were growing. Ashley returned at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. She was unusually animated. "How are you, dear? Did you rest?" "Yes." Jason called. Ashley's expression changed instantly. "What did he want?" "He was worried about me. He also said he contacted the police." Ashley froze with the bags in her hands. "The police? Why?" "He wants them to check your background." Ashley was silent for a few seconds, thinking about the information. Then she laughed, but it sounded forced. "Let them check. I have nothing to hide." But Bob noticed how her shoulders tensed and her fists clenched. The rest of the day passed in a strange atmosphere. Ashley was overly attentive. She cooked dinner, offered tea, massaged his shoulders, but her movements betrayed her nervousness. "Bob," she said in the evening as they sat in the living room, "what if we leave here?" "Where to?" "I don't know. On vacation. Or move to another city. Start a new life." "Why?" "There's too much gossip and suspicion here. Jason has turned people against me." Bob thought about it. The offer was tempting, to get away from all the problems and start over. But something held him back. "I need to think about it." "Of course, but not too long. Sometimes opportunities don't wait." At 8 o'clock in the evening, Detective Stevens' car pulled up to the house. Bob saw it from the window and felt his heart start to race. "Who's that?" Ashley asked, looking out the window. "Detective Stevens." Ashley's face turned pale. "What does he want?" "To talk to us, probably." Mark Stevens walked up to the porch and knocked. Bob opened the door. "Good evening, Bob. May I come in?" "Of course, Mark." The detective walked into the living room, where Ashley was waiting for him. She greeted him with a polite smile, but Stevens noticed the tension in her posture. "Miss King, I'm Detective Stevens. I'd like to ask you a few questions." "About what?" "About your past, specifically about Robert Shelton." Ashley sat down, folding her hands in her lap. "What exactly are you interested in?" "The circumstances of his death." "He died of a heart attack. The doctor confirmed it." "Yes, but there are questions about the will. Robert was grateful for my care. He was lonely and ill." Stevens nodded, making notes in his notebook. "Were there other elderly men who left you an inheritance before Mr. Shelton?" Ashley paused. "I'm not obligated to answer your questions without a lawyer." "This is an informal conversation, Miss King. Goodbye." Bob watched the conversation with growing alarm. Ashley's behavior was not that of an innocent person. "Detective," he interjected, "are there any specific charges against Ashley?" "Not yet, but there are some disturbing coincidences." Stevens asked a few more questions, wrote down the answers, and stood up. "Thank you for your cooperation. I may be in touch." After he left, Ashley stood at the window for a long time, watching the detective's car disappear around the corner. "They're starting to dig," she said finally. "Ashley." She turned to him, and Bob saw something new in her eyes, a cold determination. "Bob, I want you to know, I really care about you. I know. But there are things you don't understand. The world is cruel, especially to women like me. You have to fight to survive." "What are you talking about?" "About how sometimes you have to make difficult choices." Bob felt his stomach tighten with fear. "Ashley, you're scaring me." "Don't be afraid. I'm telling you. I care about you." She moved closer, and Bob noticed something shiny in her hand. "What's that?" "Medicine, for your heart." "I don't have heart problems." "You will. All old men have heart problems eventually." Bob backed away. "Ashley, what are you doing?" "What I have to do. Jason and the detective left me no choice." "No, please." Bob tried to run, but tripped over the coffee table and fell. Ashley approached him. "Don't resist. It'll only make things worse." "Help! Help!" Bob shouted. But the house was set back from the road, and the neighbors were far away. Across the street, Dorothy Pierce heard the cries and looked out her window. She saw the lights on in the Hendersons' house and silhouettes in the living room. Something was wrong. Dorothy grabbed the phone and dialed 911. 911, what's happening? "I think my neighbor needs help." "Robert Henderson? 412 Main Street, I heard screams. We're sending a car." But help was still far away, and a tragedy was unfolding in the house across the street. 20 minutes later, the screams stopped. Silence fell over the house. Ashley walked from room to room, cleaning up and rearranging things. When the police arrived, Ashley met them on the porch. She was pale, disheveled, and in tears. "Officer, thank you for coming. Something happened to Bob. A heart attack, I think." Officer Daniels went into the house. Bob was lying on the living room floor, motionless. A broken glass lay nearby. Water spilled on the floor. "What happened?" "He complained of chest pains all day. Then he suddenly grabbed his heart and fell down. I tried to give him CPR, but..." Daniels checked his pulse. "Call an ambulance." But it was too late. Robert Henderson was dead. Detective Stevens arrived half an hour later. He examined the scene, questioned Ashley, and took her statement. "You said he had heart problems?" "Yes, he was taking medication. He often complained of chest pains." Stevens frowned. A few hours ago, Bob had looked perfectly healthy. "Where are his medications?" "In the bedroom, in the nightstand." Stevens went upstairs and found a bottle of heart pills. The date was recent, but some pills were missing, as if someone had been taking them regularly. The ambulance arrived, but the doctor pronounced him dead. "Preliminary cause of death is heart failure. An autopsy will determine the exact cause." Ashley sat on the couch, crying quietly. Neighbors gathered outside the house, discussing the tragedy. "Poor girl," said one of the women, "to lose a loved one so suddenly." But Dorothy Pierce remained silent. She remembered the screams she had heard. They were not screams of pain, but of fear. When Bob's body was taken away and the police finished their investigation, Ashley was left alone in the house that now belonged entirely to her. She went into the bedroom and took her phone out of her purse. "It's me," she said quietly. "Yes, it's over. I'll be free tomorrow morning." A new day was dawning outside, but for Robert Henderson, it would never come. Dr. Michael Harris, the county's chief medical examiner, began the autopsy on Robert Henderson's body early in the morning of July 17th. Detective Stevens was present during the procedure, hoping to find answers to his growing questions. The preliminary examination shows classic signs of heart failure, Dr. Harris reported. But there are a few oddities. What are they? There are marks on his wrists, as if he was being restrained, and a bruise on his neck, as if someone squeezed his carotid artery. Stevens frowned. Could that have caused a heart attack? In a man his age, it's possible. Stress, lack of oxygen, but we'll have to wait for the toxicology report. While the doctor was working, Stevens received a call from Jason Miller. "Detective, how's my uncle? I've been trying to call all evening." "Mr. Miller, I'm afraid I have bad news. Your uncle passed away last night." A long silence, then a quiet voice. "She killed him, didn't she?" "The investigation is ongoing. Can you come in?" "I'm on my way." Jason arrived in Garrettsburg 2 hours later. He was pale and angry, barely able to contain his emotions. "Where is she?" "At the house. She's signing papers with the funeral home." "At the house that now belongs to her?" "Yes. By the way, tell me more about this transfer of ownership." Jason told him about his visit to the lawyer, how his uncle had suddenly decided to transfer the house to Ashley. He was in love. He wasn't thinking straight, but she knew what she was doing. "Is there any evidence of coercion?" "Attorney Coleman can confirm that my uncle was hesitant, but Ashley convinced him." Stevens wrote down every word. The case was becoming more complicated. Dorothy Pierce arrived at the police station around noon. The 72-year-old woman was agitated but dignified. "Detective Stevens, I have something important to tell you." "I'm listening, Mrs. Pierce." "Last night, around 9 o'clock, I heard screams coming from Bob's house. They weren't screams of pain. They were screams of terror. Someone was calling for help." "Why are you so sure?" "I've worked in a school for 45 years, Detective. I know the difference between a scream of pain and a scream of fear." Dorothy also told him about her long observations of Ashley, how she studied people, isolated Bob, and removed photos of his wife. "She planned this from the beginning. I could feel it." After talking to Dorothy, Stevens decided to take a closer look at the crime scene. He returned to the house on Main Street, where Ashley met him with red, tear-stained eyes. "Detective, any news? I'm so worried." "A few questions, Miss King. Can I look around the house again?" "Of course." Stevens walked into the living room where the body had been found the day before. He noticed something he had missed in the commotion yesterday: small drops of water on the carpet near where Bob had been lying. Strange for a heart attack. In the bedroom, he examined the medicine bottle again. The label was fresh, dated a week ago. But Dr. Wilkins, Bob's family doctor, had not prescribed him any heart medication. "Miss King, where did Mr. Henderson get these pills?" Ashley glanced quickly at the bottle. "He bought them himself. He complained of chest pains. But Dr. Wilkins says he didn't prescribe them." A short pause. "Maybe he got them somewhere else. You know how older people sometimes don't trust doctors." The explanation was unconvincing, but Stevens didn't press the issue for the moment. The toxicology report arrived the next day. Dr. Harris called Stevens immediately. "Mark, you have to see this. Henderson's blood contained digoxin, a drug used to treat heart failure, but the concentration was 5 times the therapeutic dose." "An overdose?" "Definitely. At that level, death was inevitable. The only question is whether he took the dose himself or was helped." Stevens felt his pulse quicken. Finally, some hard evidence. How long would it take to be fatal? At that concentration, between 15 and 30 minutes. First nausea, disorientation, then cardiac arrhythmia and cardiac arrest. Could he have called for help? In the first few minutes, yes. Then the arrhythmia would have started, and he would have lost consciousness. Everything matched Dorothy Pierce's story. Stevens immediately obtained a search warrant for the house. When he arrived with a team of forensic experts, Ashley greeted them with surprise. "What's going on?" "Search warrant, Miss King. We're investigating a suspected murder." Ashley's face turned pale. Murder? But Bob died of a heart attack. The autopsy showed an overdose of digoxin. Ashley was silent, thinking about the situation. Maybe he accidentally took too many pills. He was upset after Jason's visit. The detectives searched the house thoroughly. In the kitchen trash can, they found the remains of dissolved pills. In Ashley's bedroom, they found an empty digoxin bottle hidden under the mattress. "Miss King, can you explain the presence of this evidence?" Ashley realized the game was over. She sat down on the couch and covered her face with her hands. "I want a lawyer." "That's your right. But first, you're under arrest on suspicion of the murder of Robert Henderson." When Ashley was taken away to the police station, neighbors gathered at the house. The news that the sweet waitress from the cafe was a murderer shocked the entire town of Garrettsburg. "I told you there was something wrong with her," Dorothy repeated to anyone who would listen. Jason arrived to collect his uncle's personal belongings. The house officially belonged to Ashley, but the lawyer said the deal could be challenged in court if fraud was proven. In the holding cell, Ashley met with her court-appointed lawyer, a young attorney named David Clark. "Miss King, the evidence against you is serious. Tell me what really happened." Ashley was silent for a long time, then decided to tell part of the truth. Bob was sick. He was depressed after his wife died and had heart problems. He often said he was tired of living. "Are you saying it was suicide?" "Maybe, or an accident. He was taking a lot of different medications and could have mixed up the doses." "How do you explain the marks on his body?" "He fell, and I tried to help him. I may have accidentally left bruises." The lawyer knew it was a weak story, but it was all they had. Detective Stevens, meanwhile, contacted the Louisville police for details on the Robert Shelton case. Detective Rick Harris, a friend of Jason's, provided the complete file. "Shelton died under similar circumstances," he told Stevens. "Heart attack, but the family suspected poisoning. Unfortunately, the body was cremated before the autopsy." "Any other cases?" "We found two more. Gerald Cox, 73, died in Kentucky 2 years ago. He transferred his bank account to Ashley Thompson, her maiden name, shortly before his death, and Arthur Weston in Tennessee, 76 years old. Same pattern." Stevens realized he was dealing with a serial killer who specialized in elderly men. The trial began 3 months later. The prosecutor presented compelling evidence: a toxicology report, evidence from the house, and witness testimony about Ashley's strange behavior. Dorothy Pierce gave vivid testimony about how she had observed the defendant's suspicious actions. She studied his habits, isolated him from his friends, and rushed to transfer his property. It was a hunt. Jason talked about his attempts to warn his uncle and how Ashley manipulated the old man. Attorney Henry Coleman testified about how Ashley insisted on getting the paperwork done quickly. She was clearly in a hurry. Bob was hesitant, but she convinced him that it was necessary for her safety. The defense tried to portray the case as a tragic misunderstanding or suicide, but the evidence was too compelling. The climax came with testimony from a Louisville detective about similar cases in Ashley's past. The defendant used the same pattern: meeting lonely elderly men, quickly becoming intimate, gaining access to their property, and then the victim's death under suspicious circumstances. On the 4th day of the trial, Ashley unexpectedly changed her position. She asked to meet with the prosecutor. "I am willing to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence." The prosecutor agreed to hear her out. "Yes, I killed Robert Henderson," Ashley confessed, "but not out of cruelty. These men were lonely and unhappy. I gave them love and care in the last months of their lives, in exchange for their inheritance. I had to survive too. I have 2 children to support." "What about the other victims?" Ashley paused. "There were 5 of them, including Robert. They all died easily, without suffering." The confession shocked even experienced investigators. 5 murders in 3 years, all for money. The court sentenced Ashley King to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Robert Henderson's house was returned to his heirs after the deal was declared invalid. Jason decided not to sell his uncle's house. Instead, he turned it into a memorial. Part of the house became a museum telling the story of Robert Henderson's life, and part became a center for helping the elderly. Uncle Bob deserves to be remembered as a good man, not as a victim, Jason said at the center's opening. Dorothy Pierce became a volunteer counselor at the center, helping to identify cases of fraud against the elderly. If I had been more persistent, Bob might still be alive, she said. But now I can help protect others. Detective Stevens received an award for solving the serial murder case. But for him, the real reward was that justice had been served. Bob Henderson was a good man, he said at the ceremony. He deserved better, but his death will not be in vain if it helps protect others from predators like this. In prison, Ashley King spent her days in solitary confinement, reflecting on her crimes. Sometimes she received letters from the families of her victims, filled with pain and anger. But most of the time, she thought about the money she never got to spend and the children she would never see again. The town of Garrettsburg slowly recovered from the shock. Residents became more cautious and paid closer attention to their elderly neighbors. A photo of Robert Henderson was hung in the Main Street Cafe with the caption, "In memory of a friend who always greeted us with a smile."